with a short video. It's Crash Course. It is what makes us an animal. I think that's what it's called. And then at the end I have a game.
Let's suppose that you're writing a really important email to a colleague.
Hi, I want you to meet my friend Shoshana. She's a zebrafinch. She's very good at it. She's here to help me talk about comparative anatomy, which is the study of similarities and differences between the anatomy.
Oh, light switch.
We study
Sorry.
comparative anatomy because it helps us learn more about our evolution and our shared ancestry. So organisms have their evolutionary history written all over them if
There we
you
go.
know what to look for.
Press wrong button.
Which of these two living organisms would you say I'm more closely related to? Shoshana the finch or Gordon the plant? This isn't a quiz, but sure, it is a quiz. It is the easiest quiz that you will ever take in your life. Well, Gordon is green and can make his own food with just sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. While Shoshana can't make her own food. She has to move around to find stuff to eat, to escape predators, to find mates, on park benches, just like me, except not the pooping on park benches, I mean the moving around. So yeah, shocker, I am more closely related to a bird than to a plant. You get a gold star. So that one's obvious, but as the relationships between organisms get closer, the questions get a lot more interesting. So what is an animal? I mean, I know you know what an animal is, but when you're looking at Shoshana and me here, what clues you need to the fact that we are members of the kingdom Animalia? Two things. For starters, we're both moving. Locomotion is a really good sign that an organism is an animal, unless you're a sponge. Now, I know what you're thinking, though. Protists, bacteria, and archaea, they all move around using flagella and cilia, but they also only have one cell. It's the multicellular locomotion that's so peculiar and specific to animals. So animals move because of the second trait that we have in common. We're heterotrophs. We get our energy from eating other life forms. Locomotion also helps us avoid predation and seek out mates for reproduction. Now plants, they can mate by dispersing their seed to the winds or having an insect come by and fertilize them. But if plant animals did that, things would get like really messy and gross. Some aquatic animals actually do just release their sex cells into their surroundings and cross their fingers and presumably close their mouths and hope that somebody gets pregnant. So since animals have to eat and move around, they've evolved anatomical forms that help them do those things. But obviously, those forms aren't the same in all animals. For instance, in order to move, Shoshana and I both have to be able to apply force to the ground or the air to propel ourselves. Here is me pushing off the ground with my feet, and now here's Shoshana applying force to the air with her wings, which keeps her afloat and moving. And if I had a shark in the studio with me, which thankfully I do not, so I'll just pretend to be a shark, my fins would apply force to the water to propel me forward. I have to be careful with this stuff because even though similar body structures like fins or wings or feet can mean animals have a close common ancestor, it can also mean that the animals just evolved similar forms because that's the best structure for the job. When this happens, it's called convergent evolution. For example, a tuna, a penguin, and a seal are all animals that spend all or a lot of their time in the water. One's a fish, one's a bird, one's a mammal, but all three of them have a suite of similar features, the most notable being a really sleek, fusiform body that can move through the water like nobody's business, and fins for propelling those bodies. But of course, those three animals have very different evolutionary origins. Each of these three marine animals have independently converged on similar body shapes because they live in the same environment and need to do the same sorts of things. So instances of convergent evolution can make linking physical structure of an animal to its evolutionary history a little bit tricky, which is why for a long time nobody really put much stock in comparative anatomy as proof of evolution. That is, until Thomas Henry Huxley came along. Thomas Henry Huxley was the father of comparative anatomy and the father of modern paleontology, and he invented the word agnostic to describe his spiritual views, and he was the first person to conclude that birds evolved from small carnivorous dinosaurs. I'm glad I'm sitting down for this. Plus, we have much respect for his facial hair. Huxley was born in England in 1825, and though he started out as a doctor after serving as a ship surgeon on a voyage to Australia in his 20s, he took to studying marine invertebrates. During his voyage, he sent all of his papers back to England, and when he got home, he found that he had become a kind of famous marine invertebrate expert, and he was admitted into the Royal Society. Huxley made friends with some other hotshot natural scientists, including Charles Darwin, and a few years later, when Darwin outlined his theory of evolution and on the origin Huxley is reported to have said how extremely stupid not to have thought of that. In fact, he became such a huge Darwin supporter that everybody started calling him Darwin's bulldog because he threatened to cut the fool who badmouthed evolution. This is a good one. Huxley said when he was talking about On the Origin of Species, old ladies of both sexes consider it a decidedly dangerous book. You just got Huxlapped. But this is a tool of the theory of evolution, and in part to help promote the theory of evolution, Huxley connected paleontology and biology together by looking for similarities in anatomy in the fossil record, where he found all kinds of interesting stuff. Maximally obvious similarities between prehistoric horse fossils and modern-day horses, as well as between dinosaurs and birds, though nobody really bought his insights into the resemblance between birds and dinosaurs for another 100 years. And just in case you were still on the fence as to whether intelligence is heritable, Thomas Henry Huxley is the grandfather of Brave New World writer Aldous Huxley, and of Sir Andrew Huxley, who won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 1963. Now, because all animals come from the same evolutionary origin, in addition to sharing some anatomical structures, like Huxley studied, we're also built from the same rudimentary blueprint. Our cells work pretty much the same no matter what sort of animal we are. So while animals have different strategies for moving around and acquiring food, once the food is gotten, all animals break it down, turn it into useful energy, and distribute nutrients and eliminate waste in pretty similar ways. Unless you're a sponge. Each of those functions is performed by collections of cells that group together in the body to form tissues. There are 4 primary types of tissues in the human body: the epithelial tissue, the connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. Epithelial tissue is formed by cells that bind very closely together. A layer of it covers every organ and lines the digestive tract to prevent crazy acids and poop and stuff from going where it's not supposed to go. Epithelial tissue can also produce a slippery fluid to let your organs slide over each other, like the membrane that lines the inside of your ribs, so that your inflating lungs don't build up friction as they expand. Most types of connective tissue are made up of fibrous strands of collagen, protein, and it adds support and structure to your body and holds your parts together. Some examples of connective tissue include the inner layers of your skin, your tendons, ligaments, cartilage, and bone. But oddly enough, connective tissue isn't defined by its ability to connect, but instead by the presence of an extracellular matrix, meaning that part of the tissue extends outside of the cell. And so, somewhat confusingly, blood and fat are also considered connective tissues. Muscle tissue is made up mostly of 2 specialized proteins, actin and myosin, which can slide past one another and allow for movement. It also includes a bunch of other proteins, including that longest word in the world one, type. And finally, there's nerve tissue, which generates and conducts electrical signals in the body. These electrical messages are managed by the nerve tissue in the brain and transmitted down the spinal cord to the rest of the body. Nerve tissue is made up of 2 types of cells: the neurons, which do the electrical work, and the glial cells, which insulate and support the neurons. These tissues are then organized into organs, which perform different functions in the body, and these organs work together in organ systems. For instance, most animals have a digestive system made up of like a mouth and an esophagus and a stomach and intestines and an anus. And a lot of animals have a skeletal system made up of bones and tendons and ligaments and cartilage. We're going to be talking about each of these systems in a lot more detail in a few weeks. These organ systems, like many different kinds of anatomical structures, are shared by lots of different kinds of organisms, unless you're a sponge. Because about 1.6 billion years ago, an organism developed that had a digestive system and a muscular system, and suddenly that organism was in it to win it. That organism was the common ancestor for all animals today, and it's the reason why Shoshana and I are going to hang out at the Animal Family Reunion. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course Biology. If you want to check out any of the stuff we talked about,
Alright, so that's what makes us an animal. So, animals are multicellular heterotrophs that are diverse in form and habitat, are mobile, reproduce sexually, and have characteristic embryonic development. Their cellular structure. Animals are eukaryotes, and like plants and most fungi, are multicellular. In plants, unlike in animals, they lack the structural support of cell walls. And then the cells of most animals are organized into tissues, which gives the animals the ability to function and move, unlike plants, which are stationary. Animals reproduce sexually, which the diploid stage usually dominates the life cycle. In the stages of reproduction, the animal's sperm and eggs come together to let the sperm fertilize the egg and produce directly by meiotic division. Then the history of animals in the span of 500,000 years. So the first is the Neoproterozoic era, which is 1 billion to 542 million years ago. This era is divided into three major periods: the Tonian period, Cairogene period, and the Ediacara period. Rodinia, the supercontinent, was known to exist in the Tonian period, surrounded by the Myrovian Sea. The supercontinent centered somewhat south of the equator. It was assumed that there were several inland seas as well. It was marked by different significant developments in the Earth's biota, geology, and climate. These small organic microfossils were mostly found in the sedimentary rocks and originated particularly in the marine or the saline water. So, at the beginning of time, most organisms were mainly microorganisms, so they weren't as known as like when they first started, which were smaller. These were actually microorganisms, which were only found in the sea at this time. And then this is what the Rodinia looked like at the beginning. So as you can see, South Africa and Antarctica, well, everything was really mainly piled together except for India at the top. Kind of like Pangea, but in a different form. The Paleozoic era, which was 542 to 251 million years ago. The story of the earliest Paleozoic animals is one of life in the sea. Presumably, simple fungi and related forms existed in freshwater environments. This period also facilitated the fact of newer body forms being introduced and formed throughout the world in this era. During this period, vertebrates also started to colonize land around the point of 365 million years ago, and they diversed into many different terrestrial groups. And what we know, and today the only known, I'm saying that wrong. And what we know of today, two of these groups have survived, and we know them as amniotes, which are reptiles, birds, and mammals, and then amphibians such as frogs, salamanders, things like that. The Mesozoic era, which is 251 to 65.5 million years ago. The animal that we know as phyla that had evolved during the Paleozoic now has begun to change into new habitats and began to inhabit. During this time, small and large dinosaurs began to emerge, which were both predators and herbivores. Also at this time, the very first mammals were beginning to emerge into the land, which were tiny nocturnal insect eaters. And then the Cenozoic era, 65 million years ago till the present. Mass extinctions began to take part in the way animals were, they were, I forgot what I was going to say. So mass extinctions began to be a part of both terrestrial and marine animals. The global climate began to cool and began to cause many different shifts in animal lineages. Many of the body features that we are seeing today began to evolve during this time. And then animal body characteristics. A body plan is one of the particular set of morphological and developmental traits which are then put together into a functioning whole, which we know today as a living animal. Symmetry. Many animals base their physical features off of symmetry or the absence of symmetry. There's two types of symmetry. One is radial, which is found in like flowering plants. And the second is bilateral, which I'll explain this. So radial, it can be split into two halves and still have mirror images. And a bilateral, it can only be split down the middle, and that is the only place or spot where it could have a mirror image. So I have pictures of that. So a radial animal such as an anemone does not actually have a left or right side, which means that any imaginary slice through the center axis divides the animal into mirror images. So as long as it's through the center, it'll still have a mirror image no matter what. And then bilateral. When you have a bilateral animal, they have a right and left side, which means you can only make one imaginary cut right down the middle. And then parts of the bilateral organisms are the dorsal, which is the top part of the organism, the ventral side, which is the very bottom. The right and left sides do not have names, but the front is the anterior and the rear is the posterior. And then the second one on the right is a bilateral. And as you can tell, it only has the one imaginary cut, which is the only place where it has the mirror image. Okay, animal tissues. Animal body plans also vary in the way their tissues are organized or placed in their body. Developing tissues, which is known, during the process of developing tissues, they are created into germ layers. The ectoderm, the germ layer covering the surface of the embryo, which gives the rise to the outer covering of the animal, and in many phyla is the central nervous system. The endoderm, which is the innermost layer of the germ layer, gives rise to the lining of the digestive tract. Some animals that have these two germ layers, which are said to be diploblastic, but all bilateral organisms have a third layer called mesoderm, which actually fills the space between the ecto and the endoderm layers. There are also bilateral organisms that are called triploblastic, and the mesoderm forms the muscles and most of the other organs in the organism. These include from flatworms to arthropods to invertebrates. And then these are pictures of the tissues that I just talked about. Many triploblastic organisms have fluid air-filled space between the digestive tract and the outer body wall, which is called the colon. Is that how you say that? Wait, what? Okay. Coelomates. Okay. Another body cavity in triploblastic animals is pseudocolmate, which, despite its name, is not a false colm. It is a fully functional body cavity. And lastly, the final body type in triploblasts is acolmates. And then this is the difference between those three. As you can see in the first one, it has the tissue is all connected in some way. The second one is where you can see the air in between. It separates them, but it's still a body function, or a fully functioning body. And then the last one, it is all connected and does not have any air in it. And then if you go to page 675 in your books, because the picture on here isn't very clear. And then that is the difference between the protostome and the deuterostome, or the development of those two. Yeah, it's a lot better in your books. The diversification of animals. All animals share a common ancestor. Sponges are basal animals. Eumetazoa is a clade of animals with true tissues. Most animal phyla belongs to the clade Bilateria, and there are 3 major clades in the bilateral animals. Deuterostomia. I don't know. How would you say the second one? I'm not sure. And Ecdysozoa. So in the low phototrozoa, they have tentacles for feeding. As you can see on the top one, the blue picture, it shows where they're feeding. And then the Ecdysozoa, they have external skeletons. And then the Deuterostomia is the protozomes are opposite from those, so they kind of flip-flop. Are there any questions? Anything?
Turn the lights on.
Oh, I got a game too, so.
Oh, you're ready to go? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, what is going on? It's only on my computer. Okay, never mind. I guess we don't have a game. Because I have Google Chrome on mine.
Highlight it and then put it back into the browser.
Oh,
You have to go out of the program and go into, there you go. That's what's moved to the program.
let me try. Is it alright if I use Google Chrome?
It's going to a computer drive,
Wait, what?
isn't it? It says file, C, use.
Yeah, I had to download it
desktop.
to my computer, and I couldn't get it to actually go on to the. Oh, I guess we don't have a game.
Animal versus okay, so it's a HTML program, it's not a video.
No. Let me try putting it in Chrome. Yep. I think it's only on my computer. Well, that's it.
Yep, it's on your desktop.
Yeah.
Okay, so what am I thinking? So, what is the difference between a vertebrate and an invertebrate? What does that mean?
Spine.
Spine? Yep. So, the vertebral column, they're a vertebrate. If they're an invertebrate, that would be no, right? No spinal column. So we are eventually, actually vertebrates, right? And we have, the next division would be chordata. We have the cord. So that allows us to have vertebrate with a spinal cord. Some animals don't have a spinal cord. Some animals don't have a skeletal system either. Right? So give me a name of an animal that doesn't have
Jellyfish?
Jellyfish, how about swarm?
With the shark count and that's garbage.
Right, those are different.
Worm?
Worms,
Sponge, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
some people are classified as spineless wonders, but that's not.